Ever get that feeling like something you learned way back when in history class? Like something that felt totally irrelevant at the time
Hmm.
suddenly comes back to bite you.
Like trying to remember the quadratic formula right in the middle of tax season.
Huh, yeah, exactly. Okay, maybe not quite that dramatic. But today we're diving into something that felt like a dusty old history lesson right up until pretty recently. We're talking the 14th Amendment, Section 3, and how it's become surprisingly relevant in 2025.
Yeah, it's wild how this amendment, originally it was aimed at post-Civil War Confederates, but now it's being fiercely debated by legal scholars,
Yeah,
and even making headlines in relation to the upcoming election.
for sure. You might heard some whispers about it, right? Maybe even caught wind of that Colorado Supreme Court ruling against Trump in the 2024 primary. But today we're getting into the nitty-gritty. What does this amendment actually say, and why is it causing such a stir right now?
Well, Section 3 states that no person shall hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof.
Okay, wait a minute, back up. No person shall hold office. That's some pretty strong wording, right? This isn't just like a subjection, it's a hard line in the sand. And it applies to anyone who's taken that oath to the Constitution, right? Not just talking presidents here.
You got it. That's exactly right. We're
Yeah.
talking everyone from local officials to federal judges, anyone who's pledged to uphold the Constitution.
So the million-dollar question is what exactly constitutes insurrection or rebellion, right? Is it just like strongly disagreeing with the government, or is there a higher bar here?
Well, the sources we've been looking at, they use language like concerted, meaning it's a planned effort, forceful, suggesting violence or at least the threat of violence. The language really focuses on actions that aim to overthrow or, dismantle the government's authority.
Hmm. So think back to history class, right? The Whiskey Rebellion, John Brown's raid. Those are pretty clear-cut examples, right? Armed uprisings against the government.
Exactly. Those historical events, although, they were different in a lot of ways, they help us understand what Section 3 is getting at, right?
Yeah.
The Whiskey Rebellion involved armed resistance against federal taxes. John Brown's raid was a violent attempt to incite a slave revolt. Both involved deliberate efforts to challenge the government through force.
And the source material even mentions the Colfax Massacre of 1873. That was a horrific incident where armed white supremacists attacked black citizens and officials in Louisiana. It seems like the framers of the 14th Amendment had very real and very violent events in mind.
Absolutely. And those examples are crucial because they give us a framework for interpreting Section 3's application today. But there's another layer to this, and this is where things get particularly interesting.
Okay, all ears, lay it on me.
It's the question of whether Section 3 is what's called self-executing.
Self-executing.
Yeah.
So, it doesn't need Congress to pass new laws for it to kick in.
Exactly. The sources we're exploring argue that it is self-executing, meaning it has immediate effect through the Constitution itself. And that's what makes it so potent. It doesn't rely on the whims of Congress or shifting political winds.
Wow, that's a big deal. So if it's already baked into the Constitution, it's the duty of officials, like judges and election officials, to enforce it. And we, the citizens, have a responsibility to hold those officials accountable to their oaths.
That's the core of it. The Constitution guides our officials, and we, the people, have a duty to make sure that guidance is followed.
But hold on, what about free speech? Does this mean someone could be disqualified just for talking about insurrection, even if they don't actually do anything?
That's a crucial question, and it exposes the tension between Section 3 and the First Amendment's protection of free speech. However, the source material argues that in cases of direct conflict where someone's speech incites an actual insurrection, Section 3 might actually supersede the First Amendment.
Hold up, supersede. I know we have a lot of legal minds listening, but just to be clear, does that mean it overrides free speech in those specific situations?
That's the essence of the argument, yes. And the source material dives into some compelling historical examples to support this interpretation.
Like what? Give me the juicy historical gossip.
Well, there's the case of John Y. Brown, who was excluded from Congress in 1867 for advocating, violent resistance to the Union. This was actually before Section 3 was even ratified, which suggests a historical precedent for, limiting speech that incites rebellion.
That's wild. So even before the 14th Amendment was officially on the books, there was already this sense that certain kinds of speech just crossed the line. What other examples did the sources mention?
Another one is the case of Victor Berger, a socialist newspaper editor who was excluded from the House in 1919 for what they considered disloyal speech during World War I. Now, this case raises some red flags, though. It makes you wonder about overreach, right? And using this amendment to just silence dissent.
Right? That's a slippery slope, isn't it? What's to stop people from labeling any opposing viewpoint as like disloyal and using Section 3 to shut down any legitimate criticism?
Yeah, exactly. It highlights the potential for abuse and, really underscores the need for a very careful and judicious application of this amendment.
And then there's Zebulon Vance, an ex-Confederate senator. His story is kind of a head-scratcher, right?
Vance's case is particularly interesting because he was initially blocked from office under Section 3, but later pardoned. This inconsistency in how the amendment has been applied throughout history, it adds another layer of complexity.
Okay, so we've got these historical cases, this debate about free speech, the question of who gets to decide if someone's disqualified. It feels like there are pieces of the puzzle scattered everywhere.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure. And to complicate things even further, there's another piece of the puzzle we need to think about, the Electoral College.
Ah, yes, the Electoral College, that uniquely American institution that always seems to add a twist to our presidential elections.
Precisely. Remember, the Electoral College is ultimately responsible for choosing the president. And in the context of Section 3, its role becomes even more significant. What if electors believe a candidate is disqualified under Section 3? Could they refuse to vote for them?
Hold on, that's a mind-blowing thought. Could the Electoral College potentially override the popular vote based on Section 3?
It's a question that's being very hotly debated right now. There's no clear historical precedent for this. But some legal scholars argue that the Electoral College has a constitutional duty to consider Section 3 when casting their votes.
Wow, okay, so even if a candidate wins the popular vote and gets their name on the ballot, the Electoral College could still throw a wrench in the works. This is getting intense.
It certainly adds a layer of unpredictability, especially considering how close and contentious recent elections have been.
It's like that stress test analogy you mentioned earlier. It feels like our entire system is about to be pushed to its limits.
Absolutely. This isn't just a legal or political debate. It's a test of our democratic institutions, our commitment to the rule of law, and ultimately our commitment to upholding the Constitution.
And it's happening right now in real time. What unfolds over the next few weeks, even days, could have a ripple effect for years to come.
And as we've emphasized throughout this deep dive, it's not just up to the courts or politicians to figure this out. It's on all of us as citizens to engage with these issues, educate ourselves, and demand that our leaders uphold the Constitution.
This isn't a spectator sport. We're not just watching history unfold. We're all active participants.
Well said. This is a moment that calls for informed civic engagement, for reasoned debate, and for a reaffirmation of our shared commitment to the principles that underpin our democracy.
Wow, this whole deep dive has really been eye-opening. I mean, who knew that an amendment drafted over 150 years ago could be so relevant to our lives today?
It really is a testament to how the Constitution, while it was a product of its time, it continues to shape our nation in these profound ways. The framers couldn't have foreseen, the specific challenges that we face today, but they did create a framework that allows us to grapple with them.
It's like they gave us this incredible toolbox, and now it's up to us to figure out which tools to use and how to use them effectively.
Exactly. And as we've seen with Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, choosing the right tool and using it responsibly is crucial. There's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of room for interpretation, and that's where we as citizens we have a critical role to play. We can't just sit back and wait for the courts or Congress to figure it all out.
Well, we need to engage with these issues, educate ourselves, and make sure our voices are heard, especially considering we're just 3 days away from a potentially historic moment, the certification of the electoral votes on January 6th.
That's right. And given what we've talked about with Section 3 and its potential application to those involved in the January 6th insurrection, this certification process takes on a whole new level of significance.
So what can we as everyday citizens actually do to make a difference in these next few crucial days?
Well, one of the most powerful things you can do is contact your member of Congress. Let them know that you're aware of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and that you believe it should be applied to those who participated in the insurrection, including Donald Trump.
So you're saying we should be advocating for our representative to object to the certification of those votes?
Exactly. Explain to them that this isn't about overturning the election or undermining democracy. It's about upholding the Constitution and ensuring that those who've engaged in insurrection are held accountable.
But wouldn't objecting to the certification of votes create chaos and instability?
Well, it's understandable to have those concerns. But remember, the Constitution itself provides a mechanism for addressing these situations. It's designed to handle challenges and disputes. In fact, ignoring a potential disqualification under Section 3 could create a far greater threat to our democracy in the long run.
Okay, so what's the best way to approach our representatives? Should we be writing like strongly worded letters, making phone calls, showing up at their offices?
All of the above. The key is to be clear, firm, and respectful. Remember, you're not trying to pick a fight. You're trying to engage in a constructive dialogue. Explain your understanding of Section 3, why you believe it applies in this situation, and why it's so crucial for our representatives to uphold their oath to the Constitution.
Right, it's about reminding them that they work for us, the people. And ultimately, their duty is to protect the Constitution, even if it means making difficult decisions.
Precisely. And as we've discussed throughout this whole deep dive, it's a chain of responsibility. The Constitution guides our officials, and we, the people, hold those officials accountable.
It's a powerful reminder that our democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation from each and every one of us, especially in moments like these when the very foundations of our system are being tested.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, exploring the complexities of the 14th Amendment, its historical context, and its potential implications for this upcoming certification process.
It's been a whirlwind of information, but I feel like we've equipped our listeners with the knowledge and tools they need to engage in this really critical moment.
Yeah, I hope so. Remember, folks, don't just take our word for it. Dive into that source material we've discussed. Do your own research and form your own conclusions.
And most importantly, act on those conclusions. Contact your representatives, engage in thoughtful discussions with your friends and family, and let's navigate this challenging moment together, guided by the principles enshrined in our Constitution.
Because ultimately, the future of our democracy depends on an informed, engaged, and active citizenry.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a wrap on our deep dive into the 14th Amendment and its potential impact on the 2025 election. We've covered a lot of ground, explored some fascinating history, and hopefully sparked some thought-provoking conversations.
It's been a privilege to unpack these complex issues with you. And as always, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought to ponder.
Ooh, I love these final thoughts. Give it to us.
Well, we've talked about the Constitution as a living document, open to interpretation. But that interpretation doesn't just happen in courtrooms or legislative chambers. It happens in the hearts and minds of every citizen. How we understand our rights and responsibilities, how we engage with our government, how we uphold the principles enshrined in that document, all of that contributes to shaping the legacy of the Constitution.
So what will Section 3's legacy be? That's a question we're all helping to answer right now through our actions and our choices.
Exactly. And as we navigate these uncertain times, let's remember that the Constitution isn't just a set of rules. It's a reflection of our shared values, our aspirations for a more perfect union. Let's strive to live up to its ideals, to protect its legacy, and to ensure that its guiding principles continue to light the way for generations to come.
Beautifully said. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep.